So hello, my name's Zack Smith. I'm a fifth generation farmer from Buffalo Center, Iowa, located kind of on the Iowa-Minnesota border between Minneapolis and Des Moines. And happy to be here today at the Minokan Farm Conference talking about the system that I've been developing over the last 4 years called stock cropping. So I'm a corn and soybean farmer by kind of trade, and I've spent most of my career in the ag retail space. I retired a couple years ago just to farm and focus on developing stock cropping. So what is stock cropping? Stock cropping is the reintersection of livestock and row crops in the field at the same time, and it's made possible by the novel invention that we created a couple years ago that we call the cluster cluck. And the cluster cluck is a autonomous multi-species mobile grazing barn that allows a multitude of different species of livestock to be integrated into row crop production. And so we've been developing the system as well as cluster cluck technology to be able to be used not only in potentially cornfields, but as well with other venues such as backyards, acreages, homesteads, vineyards, orchards, solar arrays, and then all the way up to our biggest barns that we're going to create for what we believe is a regenerative, scalable production system that we call stock cropping.
Like you said, my name is Zack Smith. I'm a 44-year-old farmer from northern Iowa. Cash grain farmer, corn and soybeans has pretty much been my life for the last 30 years, I suppose, since I started farming with my dad a long time ago. For the last 4 years, as was introduced, I've been working on a system, an alternative kind of regenerative production system called stock cropping, which attempts to reintegrate livestock into a row crop production system in kind of a unique and synergistic arrangement. What I will say off the bat is I am not the know-all soil health expert. I've been in this space for about 15 years, kind of in a gradual ascent to knowledge, but I have nowhere near the knowledge of somebody like Dr. Dykstra, which he was absolutely fantastic this morning, or Dr. Lal. I'm more of a first principles guy, and like was alluded to, I've really tried to focus on incorporating all of the 5 principles of regenerative agriculture in the system that we've developed called stock cropping. One of the contexts, or I guess the 6th principle that's been added to the regen principles or soil health principles is context. And the system that I've been working on and developing the context is set in northern Iowa. And although it may not transfer wholly to Bismarck, North Dakota, the concepts and the principles within it of enterprise stacking and the magic of the biohacks of the different field arrangements we put together, I think are universal. So if you're looking at this and what we're going to talk about and say, there's no way in hell that can work in Bismarck or in North Dakota, I challenge you to look and listen to the principles I'm talking about and find creative solutions on how it may adapt, because it's been a heck of a good ride that we've been on the last 4 years, and I'm really grateful for the invite to come to North Dakota here. So I was born and raised on a small corn and soybean farm just outside of Buffalo Center, Iowa, which is kind of right in between Minneapolis and Des Moines on the Iowa-Minnesota border. And my dad and mom raised corn and soybeans. We had about 900 to 1,000 acres, give or take. And we also had a farrow to finish hog operation until the early 90s. And my dad, that's where I started working probably about the age of 7, hauling manure and running skid loader, and I loved to farm. That's all I wanted to do. And had experience with livestock up until about middle school, and my dad saw the writing on the wall coming that the vertically integrated hog system was coming to Iowa that started in central Iowa and then built out in the early 90s, and so he decided to exit the pork business and just focus the farm simply on corn and soybeans, since that's all I knew really growing up after that point. But I was the oldest of 5 kids, and my youngest brother was 17 years younger, so although I wanted to come back and farm, there wasn't room for me. My dad had to farm for quite a while before there would be enough room for me to come back and participate. And so I left the farm in 1998 and attended Iowa State University in Ames and studied agronomy. And when I came out in 2002, there was really no thought of going back home to try farming then either, because my siblings were still young. And commodity markets were in the crapper. Corn was loan rate, it was $1.80 a bushel. Beans were $5.50, and it just wasn't a great environment to come out and try to get into the working world. But I ended up doing something I never thought I would have done if I wasn't coming back to farm. I came back and took my first job as a farm manager for another operation in a seed company, and did that for a couple years, and then transitioned into my ag chem retail role, where that's where I really cut my teeth in ag business. I worked as a crop protection salesman for the next 11 years, and all of the things that Dr. Dykstra talked about this morning that completely destroy microbes in the soil, I sold hundreds and hundreds of thousands of gallons of them. Glyphosate, organophosphates, all the things that are counterproductive to this regen space. I exited that in 2015 because I wanted to go off on my own. I've always kind of had an entrepreneurial bug, and had the opportunity to work my way into a Pioneer seed dealership. When I took that business over, it was kind of degraded. Sales weren't super hot at that time, and so I stacked a bunch of other enterprises, that common theme that I'm going to talk about later, onto it, where I had chemical, fertility consulting, cover crops, and soil sampling. Those were all the services that I offered. So I was kind of your typical ag corner retail spot. Along the way, I should back up and say I actually did start farming in 2010. My dad, there was just one of my brothers that was left, the youngest in the house. Dad was getting closer to retirement, and decided with the ethanol boom and prices up and profitability up, there was room for me. So I started crop sharing an 80-acre field then. Dad then retired in 2013, and I took over part of our family's acres. I farmed about 300 acres at night and on the weekends to keep the farming itch satisfied. I did my Pioneer business until 2021, where I did what most people in big ag don't do, which is once you get all your debt paid off and you're ready to print money with your small business, you retire at the age of 42. But that's what I did. And there are a couple reasons why I did that. Number one, what I'm going to talk about today, the stock cropper, was invented, and we came up with that in 2020. And we were gaining a lot of steam and momentum, and I wanted to spend more time focusing on developing this concept I'm going to talk about today. Number two was one of my seed customers came to me and gave me the opportunity that I always wanted my entire life, which was to have the ability to farm full-time. So he had about 700 acres, and with that, and my mom and dad's 500 acres made me have enough, at least in Iowa. That may be small for North Dakota standards, but 1,200 acres is a viable operation in my neck of the woods. And so I was lucky enough to become a full-time farmer in 2022. But one of the biggest reasons in the back of my head in participating in this history that I've had was I would wake up in the morning and I wasn't really believing in what I was doing anymore. I looked at the direction of agriculture and what I describe to a lot of people as kind of this funnel of consolidation, where every year there are fewer and fewer participants, there's fewer and fewer farmers, there's fewer and fewer businesses on Main Street, fewer kids in the school in our local communities. And then as somebody that along the way had become really passionate about soil health, I saw that in my business, what I was doing was rewarding the largest farms with the largest discounts that were most likely to do probably the poorest job, not in totality, but in general, of taking care of the land. And I could see that this course was not going to change unless things changed. And I had other opportunities that I wanted to pursue, and that's why I made the changes I did to leave the business in 2021. So this is the context of where I'm at. My map dot right there, I'm about 20 miles south of I-90, or 35 miles west of I-35. We're so far from home that North Dakota didn't even fit on the map. Right now we're 547 miles from home to be exact. But this is the context in which we get to farm in. This is some of the richest soil in the world on what's known as the Des Moines Lobe. This is where the glacier came across Iowa 18,000 years ago and bulldozed it relatively flat, not Red River Valley flat, but relatively flat, and left some of the richest, deepest topsoil in the world. We've solved it. Was the prairie pothole region, but we drained it like what has happened up here in the Dakotas, and now it's an absolutely fantastic place to farm. We get typically 28 to 35 inches of precip, which makes it a really, really nice place to grow things. However, for the context of what you're going to see has been developed over the last year, we've had more Bismarck-type precip with 15 to 20 inches of rain. We've been in a drought for the last 4 years. And so we're looking forward to hopefully getting replenished. We're dry as a bone right now. The other thing with the context I would say is this is, from a soil health or practice standpoint, this is 90 to 95% conventional tillage territory. 5 to, maybe 4 to 5% of cover crops get used, some strip till, but mainly conventional tillage. And then the other thing I would say, our context outside of corn and soybeans, is we grow primarily pork and chicken in confinement. This is one of the biggest concentrations in the state on the Des Moines lobe of those forms of livestock. So my journey into this soil health thing, it wasn't because this was what Dad was doing growing up. I got drawn into the soil health community before soil health was even a thing, when I was interested in this concept of strip till, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. I saw strip till first on the website New Ag Talk in the early 2000s, like 2007 or 8, and I was fascinated with it, not because of the soil benefits, but I just liked the idea of efficiency. With just tilling a narrow strip, putting my fertility on, and planting right over that zone. It made a lot of sense to me. And this was before a lot of the soil health movement was really kicking off. But the problem was I wasn't in control of anything on the farm. My dad was in control. And I was trying for years to get him to switch to this, but Dad was nearing retirement, and like a lot of father-son relationships, Dad usually wins. So after the first good year I had in 2011, I went to my dad and I said, listen, I've got money in my pocket. I sold my corn for $6 or $6.50 that year. I'm going to go buy a strip till bar. And I said, you're either going to, I'm either going to do it with or without you. You get to pick. And because my dad and I are two alphas, and we banged heads a lot here. He's here today, sitting in the back of the room over there, so he can attest to it if you don't believe me. And so he wasn't happy about it, but a few days later, him and my mom decided that they were going to give me some rope to hang myself with, and they said, if you buy the strip till bar, we'll buy the fertilizer cart and the RTK system. And we were off and running with strip till in the fall of 2011. So right away in 2012, I started to understand what this soil health thing was all about. This is a side-by-side field of us on the left here with strip till corn stalks versus our neighbor with corn on corn. So this field is similar to how we would have normally managed, with moldboard plowing, a couple passes of a field cultivator, 32%, and then planting. And this is what it looked like 20 minutes after 1.5 inches of rain fell. And I remember the first time I was going to my daughter's concert uptown, and I snapped this picture, and I took it to my dad, and I showed him. I said, this is one of the reasons why we're doing this. So later on that year, a lot of you know that 2012 was a drought. And while we had rain early on in the season, it turned off drier than a popcorn fart the rest of the year. And one of the things that Dad was worried about with converting a strip till was, would it work for corn on corn? Because we had about 1/3 of our acres in corn on corn. So he gave me, again, rope to hang myself with. He gave me 15 acres out of an 80-acre field to have an experiment where we would try my way versus his way. And we took it head-to-head and took it to yield. And everything we do, we weighed with a grain cart scale to make sure that the yield monitor variance couldn't alter the truth of our results. And I'll never forget the day, because we were going across, and I was in the combine, Dad was in the cart, and we came across the field on my side, and it looked pretty good, and we got into Dad's side and took his 12 rows side by side, and we got to the end of the field, and I could tell on the monitor that I was better. I just didn't know how much. And I got out of the cart, and the combine walked over to the cart, and Dad was sitting in the cab, and he was just looking at the scale, and he was looking at his cell phone that he just got done doing the math on what things actually turned out. And he wouldn't look at me, and he wouldn't say anything. And I sat there in silence for quite a while, and he just kept looking at the scale. And finally, he broke the silence and said, "Wipe that damn smile off your face." And then he turned to me and said, "I've been doing it wrong for 40 years, and we're going to change and do it your way from here on out." And so that's what happened. The next year, that fall, we went and we strip tilled everything. And the neat thing about that story is that I was pretty lucky in the fact that most people at 30 usually have a dad in the way that kind of blocks that, and that is in control. And I give my folks a lot of credit for yielding to this crazy idea, because without him getting, as I say, without my dad getting the hell out of the way, none of what you're going to see would have came true. So I would encourage all of you, if you've got somebody young in your operation, give them a rope to hang yourself with. Something like this may just be down what you're going to see later here, be down the pike. So kind of fast forward to get to the heart of the stock cropper. We got introduced to cover crops in 2013 due to prevent plant. 2014, I took over the farm and incorporated covers and strips across all my acres. I'm one of 2 farmers in my county that do these practices on 100%. So I'm one of the village idiots that a lot of people like to talk about when our fields look like this in the spring. But over the next 5 or 6 years, I really started to get the hang of it. I made mistakes, I learned from them, but our production was still going like this. And it was obvious to me that we were really on the right path when it came to the changes that we were making on the farm. But when we got to about 4 years ago, almost to the day, I guess a month prior, January 2020, we were hit with something. No matter how efficient I was or what my yields were, I couldn't figure out how to make money because we had 275 corn, 725 beans the last week of January that year. And I was honestly thinking about quitting farming and just focus on my seed business at that point. Because what good did it do to spend time away from my family to lose money? If this was right on the backside of the trade war, right before COVID hit, things were really not looking good for the future of things. But instead of quitting, I had a couple buddies. These characters right here on the screen, of course myself, and then this is Sheldon Stevemer and Lance Peterson on the right there. And we were all strip tillers. We were buddies that kind of through the internet. We were all kind of quite a ways apart in distance. But we were trying to brainstorm a way out of this economic conundrum. And what we were trying to figure out is how could we increase revenue on the farm without having to go to somebody like me and buy a solution in a jug like a fungicide? How could we raise revenue without increasing inputs? And we were focused around this term that I call biohacking, with this practice of strip intercropping. And this is nothing new. This has been around since ancient times. Ancient farmers used this type of an arrangement. But every 100 miles, usually there's a village idiot like me that's doing something like this. But the reason that you can increase revenue on the farm with strip intercropping is if you plant a tall crop like corn next to a short crop like beans, what you do is, in opening up the canopies, you create edge rows that get full photosynthetic capacity up and down the plant and allow for yields on those outside rows to be increased substantially. So where a field like this normally in northern Iowa would yield 230 to 250 bushel an acre, the outside rows can have in-row yields of 400 to 450. And so the idea is that you raise all ships, you boost corn yields typically from 50 to 70 bushel versus static production like we've done. And then the beans on the inside take a negative inflection from the shading of the corn. It's typically about 10%. In this field, the outside beans here 2 years ago were 75 bushel, and these were, I think, 68 or 69 in the middle to give you a kind of an idea. But the idea is that the corn out yields it enough that economically you're better off than just monocropping it all the way across the board. So what we were trying to figure out, we weren't happy with that. We wanted to find something that would do as well as 300 bushel corn in between where the bean slot was. And so we were looking at things like relay cropping specifically. How could we put a winter cereal into this lane where we would normally do the beans and then come back in, harvest or plant soybeans in like say April or May, harvest the winter cereal and then harvest the bean to try to get 2 crops in 1 year. But there's a lot of issues with doing that at our latitude. It's tough to get it, just like it probably would be tough to do that here in North Dakota consistently. And so we kind of got to the point where we just didn't know if we were going to even screw around with it at that point. But that was until one faithful night when my buddy Lance here in the Dare shirt, appropriately enough, was sipping on some bourbon up on the northern hinterland. So Lance is about straight east of here, north of Twin Cities. And he's a pretty interesting cat. If you follow him on Twitter, he's Lance from the Lower St. Croix. And he was sipping whiskey by himself in his house, and he was thinking about this system, and he had a thought of what we could maybe put instead of soybeans. And the thought was, what if we put a pen of sheep in between these strips of corn? And he sent that via DM on Twitter to myself and my buddy Sheldon. And it was late at night when he had this thought. Obviously, it was a few glasses in. And the next morning, I picked up my phone and I looked at it and saw it, and he wanted to know what I thought. And I said, well, I think that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. But then the more we started texting about it, the more this idea was started to be hatched out and born. And I said, well, what if it wasn't just a pen of sheep? What if it was a whole cornucopia of livestock where we would have 3 or 4 different species? We're told we don't have enough diversity on the landscape of livestock. What if we devised something that could have, a ruminant like a sheep or goats or maybe cattle out front, and then we would have hogs come behind, and then maybe chickens behind that, and we would devise this thing it'd be a contraption that would have solar panels to advance it, and we'd put GPS steering pucks and a control system just like our tractors, so that the machine could be autonomously moved through these strips, kind of parading animals in this controlled movement. And the barn would have an inverted roof that would capture its own rainfall to minimize the need for choring. And all of what you're going to see here came up with about a 15-minute brainstorming rapid-fire session on Twitter on February 9th, I think, of 2020 was the original idea. So there's lots of good ideas that get concocted up in the wintertime, but seldom do they see the light of day. But we got to work. I should say, I back up a second. I was so excited about this idea for the next couple days because what I was confident that we'd done is we'd stumbled on to trying to solve the elusive unicorn of how do we integrate a multitude of animal diversity back onto the landscape, which was kind of the thing that nobody had figured out how to do. Yes, there's cattle and sheep, single species, but actually getting a multitude of livestock, I thought we were onto something. So while the rest of the world was starting to shut down with the COVID in March of 2020, we got to work, busy designing and scheming up what you see here, which is the frame of our innovation. And thankfully, my buddy Sheldon up there in the corner, he has his master's in ag engineering. He's a brilliant mechanical engineer that's designed a lot of really great things. He designed this with my help and then put it into SolidWorks. We fabricated it on Memorial Day weekend of 2020, and on June 14th, 2020, we launched this out into the world for the first time. So this is what we believe to be the world's first multi-species mobile grazing barn unit, a barn that has the ability to house and graze sheep and goats out front. On the front grazing pen you see here, they have the ability to come into the barn on this side. The pigs are on this side to come in, and they have the ability to come out and graze and interact with the soil here. And then further behind, you'll see in the next pictures, we had chicken tractors. So we had 4 different species of livestock. You can see the inverted roof that we dreamt up that had the ability to refill our 110 gallons of water storage. The barn had raised flooring with tenderfoot flooring, onboard feeders for additional creep feed, and we advanced this thing. You can see this old tractor in the back end. We took a electric winch, battery powered the first year, and we advanced it several times a day by hitting the button on the winch and pulling our device across these pasture strips that you see in between strips of corn. Now, when you invent the world's first 3-ring animal circus on wheels, you need to have a good name for your prototype. And so what we called this contraption was the Cluster Cluck 5000. So while it was fun to have something called the Cluster Cluck 5000, what was more exciting was the idea of creating this system that we call stock cropping, which I define simply as the reintersection of livestock, a diverse mix of livestock and crops and pasture in the field at the same time. And this is what it looked like. The first year we took 2 acres that we played around in the small plot. So these are about 300-foot strips. We went in and strip-tilled the corn residue that we had here, planted corn here. We planted it was I think a 5 or 6-way pasture mix of both cool and warm season plants. We really didn't know. Nobody could tell us how this was going to work, so we planted 3 lanes of a mix, not knowing how fast we were going to move through until we got the barn rolling. So this was, I think, late April, early May, and then this is what the barn looked like about the middle of June coming through our first set of strips. This is a picture that gives you kind of a better idea later in the summer that I shot with my drone. This picture was taken, I think, about the middle of August that year, and you can see kind of the dynamic of the system. So the barn started here on June 14th, and we grazed through here in July. But when we got over this strip, you see that there's nothing there. That's because our oats got so far. We put 2 bushel of oats in the mix. That's what was told to us. And they dominated the mix so much that there was no room for the warm season stuff to come up. And so we literally, we didn't want the sheep and the goats to have trouble with all of the oats that were out there, so we mowed them off. We didn't get any rain, so nothing came up. So we had to hay basically the ruminants through this strip, but we still got the advantage of the manure spreading out the back of the barn. And then we, at the same time, we seeded in some warm season stuff here so that we had pasture in the 3rd lane. So we went up, down, and then we came back and grazed this lane for a 2nd time. You can also see that we played with the alterations. It's a little bit tough on these screens, but we changed the arrangement of the corn as well to maximize this edge effect. So we planted a shorter hybrid on the outside of the strips and then a taller hybrid in the middle. And you'll see in a few slides why we did that. And we also increased the population to really be driven of maximizing the population and the yield on that outside full sunlight row. So I'm just going to run through real quick some of the pictures from that first day in the field. So you can see the little goat kids that we had out in front. These are our Joel salad and chicken tractors that we had behind the system. So the first year, we set those up to be just manually moved. So we'd move the main barn first with a winch, and then we would pick up and pull the salad and tractors forward. Now we have this all integrated into one one animal train. So we have a hitch tying the saladins together to the back of the barn, and the winch pulls the whole thing ahead on its own. The first year, one of the mistakes we made was, well, I shouldn't say it was a mistake. We had to alter it in the future, but when we moved the animals, we had to lock them up so that we could pull our winch tight, and then we would rotate the front grazing pen panel up, and then we would pull the barn ahead, let the tension off the winch, shut the gate, let the animals back out. So we would do that 2 to 3 times a day with that configuration. This is a pic of our gutter rainwater system, complete with an overflow. So it took 9/10 of an inch of rain to give us 110 gallons of water, which kept the animals watered, depending on how hot it was, for 3 to 4 days without having to fill. And that first year, we were close enough to a well that we were able just to have a garden hose to hook up and fill it when we needed to do that. You can see the inside of the barn here with the cup water system, mineral lick for the ruminants, creep feeder capacity. There's our tenderfoot flooring. And that was a big thing, especially when it did rain, it was nice to be able to have the animals out so they weren't, especially the pigs, not destroying this back pen and leaving a big wallow hole there. So, and then this was our water overflow so that we would shoot the water to the outside edge row of corn if we had more than 9/10 of an inch. These are the pics of the size of the animals that were starting out, usually end of May, first part of June. Size of the chicks there, a couple weeks old, the 35-pound feeder pigs, and then the lambs, the Katahdin lambs that we've been using. And these are just some of the beauty pics that I like showing off. For me, it's a joyful way to raise livestock. The lack of smell, the animals being happy, and when you show this to consumers very quickly, when I go to the city and show people what I'm doing, they ask a lot of questions like, why isn't everybody doing this to raise stuff in this fashion? This is the slide I was referring to where you can see this edge effect that happens in the corn canopy. So this picture is actually from this last year, but it really illustrates this phi effect that you get across the canopy where the westernmost row doesn't have to grow as tall to compete for sunlight. So this is all one hybrid in this scenario. And you can see the inner rows compete up because their yield has to go, their plants grow higher to try to get the yield, which typically comes from the ear leaf and above, where these plants have the capacity to fix photosynthesis from the bottom all the way to the top. So they don't have to grow as much. But these outside rows is where you really can crank the numbers out. And this is what 450 bushel corn looks like. This was planted, population of about 45,000. And you just have a wall of Donkey Kong ears on that outside edge. And that's how you raise the overall yield of the corn in between. So at the end of the first year, we had a field day. We invited folks. We put it up on Twitter. We had no idea who was going to show up to it, but we ended up having people from 7 states, North Dakota, South Dakota, Kansas, Illinois, Indiana, Minnesota, I think were some of the folks that came the first year. And the comment that we got is, this is really cool, but how does this scale, okay? And we knew that already because in order for this to scale where you're not going out and yanking these devices, imagine having a 160 acre field, you might have 50 or 60 of these things working out on it. And so we knew that we needed to get it autonomous. So for those of you that know who Jason Mock is, this was him. He came out to my field day the first year. Jason is a really innovative farmer from Indiana that's become a really good friend and supporter of what I've been doing. He helped hook me up with a guy by the name of Joe Bassett right here. This is Joe drawn. Joe is the president and CEO of a company called Dawn Equipment, which some of you probably have heard of. They make strip till units, planter attachments, and roller crimpers for cover crops. And I know Joe's got a lot of equipment in North Dakota that his company represents. And Jason had worked with Joe on some other inventions, and we went to Milwaukee, and on a Green Bay playoff Saturday, we met in a dive bar in Milwaukee. Everybody else was watching the Packers, and we were yelling and screaming about chicken and tractors and drawing pictures and drinking Coors Light. But out of this meeting, Joe decided that he wanted in and to be a part of Stock Cropper, and this is us sitting in his facility 5 months later in June of 2021 with the shell of what became the Cluster Cluck Nano. This was a 10-foot wide barn, a dual species barn with small ruminants up front and poultry in the back. And then this is a picture of my wife and I with the debut of the first autonomous barn that we created, the Nano, that we debuted at Jason Mock's Field Day out in Gaston, Indiana. The other barn that we made in 2021, and this was probably one of the either dumbest or most creative uses of PPP money, but this is the Cluster Cluck Max 9. And I had a lot of people interested in cattle the first year, and they said, could you build one that we could put cattle in? I don't know anything about cattle, okay? I'm a pig and a chicken guy. That's pretty much what I knew growing up. But we'll build one because the money was there, and so this is what it looked like. So we put a couple calves out front and then trailed that with hogs behind, and here's some of the pictures. This worked pretty well, honestly, but I don't know if cattle are a super great fit. We can do it. They didn't have any issues. We didn't have any problem with keeping up with enough forage for them to graze on. The reason why cattle don't fit as well in is that we have to, they don't finish like all the other animals within a 4-month period during the growing season. And so we have to have something to do with them at the end. And because I don't have something to do with them, not that you couldn't, but for that reason, we used the Max 9 just the first year, and then we haven't utilized it since. So if anyone is wanting to buy this thing, doesn't it look pretty? It could be a food truck with the windows the way they open too. So, okay, so this is what the site looked like in July of 21. So the first site was at that farm I grew up. This is on the home quarter, right on the state highway that we moved the plot to. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to have multiple iterations of widths of this system of stock cropping. So here we have the 10-foot lane, and this was before the Nano got there. We built just a homemade 10-footer with sheep and goats and then chickens in the back, and then 4 rows of corn in between. Then we have our 20-foot lane with the original Cluster Cluck 5000, where we had 2 lanes of pasture, and then the crop growing in between, and then the Max 9 over here with 2 lanes of pasture and the crop going in between. And the reason that we got, or I should back up and say, in 2020 I learned the timing of grazing and what we needed for a distance, how many moves a day. And what I really wanted to do was to be able to figure out a system where we could create a racetrack pattern within a field, where we could go down, graze this, and then come back, graze the next pass, and then by the time we got back here, there would be enough to regenerate to hit it a second time. So you would basically bat the cycle twice in a year, impact stuff for only a couple hours at a time, move off, and come back about 45 to 50 days later was the idea with the schematic. But you can see here, some of the stuff that was really neat when we put the drone up was just seeing, this is where we started, we moved across, and then we turned and came back down here. And you see the amount of regrowth, and you can see the nutrients being uptaken, into this system, where versus my neighbors that have hog manure and they spread it in November, there's nothing for that manure to be taken up or stabilized with. But in this system, we're putting it right back on to put it in the plants, and we're going to come back and graze it a second time before we're done for the year. And so we had this racetrack pattern set, and it worked out really, really well that year. We finished up about the end of October, first part of November, and with a bunch of animals that we got to take to the processor. And then at the very end of 2021, the engineers worked on actually getting the Nano fully autonomous with GPS auto steer and controlled with, yes, the Cluster Cluck app on our iPhone. We have one of those, and so you program in the distance you want it to go, and then the direction, and this barn would pick itself up, move itself ahead that predetermined path. Like you see, it almost looks like a frogger hopping across the field there with some chickens that we threw in the back. This is just southwest of Milwaukee, Wisconsin in December of 2021 in a wheat field that we demonstrated it working autonomously for the first time. So in 2022, while the Nano was cool, there were a lot of things that were wrong with the first design. It was way too heavy. It weighed about 4,800 pounds or 4,500 pounds, and we needed to cut the weight. It was too difficult to manufacture. It steered like a skid steer. It had just 2 motors with chains, and they didn't work very well. So we went back to the drawing board, and we cut half the weight out of it. We put 4 wheel motors on each wheel, so we had a lot better control. We cut the number of solar panels, just made a ton of improvements to that barn. And so this is what the Nano 2 looked like when we launched it again at Jason Mock's out in Indiana late that summer. I'll go back. The other thing that I focused on in 2022 that I got interested in, I knew that not everybody was going to want to stock crop or incorporate livestock. But I was also interested in what could crop guys do to get more biodiversity out rather than just having corn and soybeans, and maybe find a way to maintain parity yields. So where the Max 9 ran the previous year, I set up these, what I call gap corn plots, where I planted twin row 60 and 90-inch corn in 3 different blocks. So each block was a different population, 16,000, 25,000, and 36,000 versus regular 30-inch corn here. So 60-inch twin, 90s, and 30s. And then within each of these treatments, we had 4 different hybrids to see the reaction of hybrid to the gap distance, because we knew that hybrids react differently to these different environments. And then in between, we seeded different mixes of cover crops to see how they would work in this situation. And what we found out at the end of the year was the 90-inch corn made about 190 bushel broad acre yield. The 60s were pretty close to the 30s. They were about 225, and the 30s, I think, were about 235 and this was another, dry year, but we caught rain just at the right time, and we were able to still get good yields out of that. And so I was intrigued by this, and we did this really kind of hodgepodge. We just used a regular 30-inch planter and planted it twice, so it was a double planting instead of a true twin row. And so, but what we learned enough out of this is that I wanted to keep going forward, and I've got a slide to show what I got in 2023 to do more of this with. The other concept that we played with was a polycropping mix of a couple different things. First, we did sweet corn and pumpkins in a 60 and 90 twin row arrangement, and then we planted sweet corn first, came back in Memorial Day, and I made my wife on Memorial Day come and help me hand plant pumpkins, and she wasn't very happy. It was about 90 degrees, and the wind was blowing 30 miles an hour. But we planted those in there, and this was just absolutely fascinating to watch both these crops grow together. And we went out and took yield estimates of what we were able to harvest out of this, and the gross revenue per acre off of the combined enterprises was about $25,000 per acre of value that we created out of this schematic. So if anybody wants something to pay for semesters worth of tuition, like next year I'll have 2 girls in college, this is a heck of a good way to generate a lot of money on a little bit of land. The other schematic that I played with here on the right side of the screen was a corn-soybean mix planted together. We planted corn first, and then we came back about V5 and drilled soybeans into the corn. Ran some corn over, but we kind of wanted to beat it up to increase the light corridors to make sure that we could get sunshine down for the beans. And this was really fascinating to watch too, because we had some fantastic in-crop yields. But one of the neat things I did was I wanted to see what the potential synergy could be with having soybeans grown with corn from a nitrogen requirement. And so half of this plot that you see in this picture, I'd put 0 nitrogen on, and you couldn't see the line all year long. The line was about right here, and the ears were every bit as good down here as they were down here. So unfortunately, we got snow on this. This was the last thing I had to harvest. We got snow on it. It matted the beans down. Everyone asked, well, how would you deal with this? You would combine it all at once and then run it through spirals to separate it. And I understand that that's not something that is available at scale. But again, it's what could be if we develop the systems to support something interesting with a super low input, double arrangement here. So like I said, I was kind of intrigued with that, and so I got this twin row gap planter in 2023 to kind of expand the plot work. I set this thing up to actually do something in between with twin 72s and then seed cover crop in between in June, and we tested that theory out in 2023 with this as well. One of the other really cool things that happened in 2023 is in the summer of 22, this guy right here, Jason Webster, who runs the Precision Planting PTI farm, called me and said, hey, I've been following you. We're doing strip intercropping at our PTI farm in Pontiac, Illinois, and we're seeing the same things. We want to have something other than soybeans, be the enterprise in between. We'd love to get one of your barns. So thankfully, we had made 2 of the Nano 2s, and we were able to get our barn down there last summer, and it worked on the PTI farm last summer all the way into last fall. And I'm really excited about this one because, it's a major American agricultural company recognizing that this maybe isn't the dumbest thing in the world to do, because on their farm this last year, strip intercropping was their highest return on investment practice. And next year, when they plant crops into where the stock cropper barn went in, and you'll see in a few slides why I'm saying this, I think this will blow any other treatment that they have on the PTI farm out from return on investment by a mile next year. The other thing I did, we've made a barn every year, and this is the cutest one we've made yet. This is the Cluster Cluck Pico. And the Pico is 7.5 foot by 7.5 foot, and it's really designed, I've kind of pivoted on where I thought our cluster clucks were going to be able to be marketed in the future. But this is a huge, probably our biggest opportunity with backyard poultry. So this barn is set up essentially not to try to feed the world, but to feed your family. So if you want to have a dozen or 15 hens to produce enough eggs for a family of 4 to 6 people, or if you want to grow 40 broiler chickens in here as well, this barn is designed to autonomously move itself across your lawn in a straight line, also controlled with a Cluster Cluck app. It's got the solar panel on top, single drive wheel, an actuator to lift the front of the barn up, move itself ahead. For any of you that have been around chickens and you're thinking about, well, autonomous movement sounds great, but chickens are dumb and they don't move. And yes, I know that because I've run chickens over doing this. And so what we invented, because we knew that if we disemboweled a chicken on some lady's yard in the suburbs, it wouldn't be a very pleasant sight. So we invented what we call the chicken fluffer in the back of the barn, which is a PVC pipe with rubber flaps that come off of it, that before the barn moves, the fluffer kicks on, the chickens get scared away from the back, and you don't have disemboweled chicken in the grass, which is a positive. But this was a picture of my field day. Kids loved it, man. We had a bunch of kids come to it with their parents, and they all wanted to hop in the barn, and I just covered my eyes on the liability policy and let them hop in. But I'm really excited about the Pico moving forward. This is what our plot looked like in July of 2023. You can see the gap corn plots. We did it more at a big field. We had about 2,000 foot a row out back that we did a bunch of different schematic analysis. And then you can see this 2023 was the year I was looking forward to, because it was the year where we started in 21, 22, and then we'd be back to the same spot we were in 2023, where we'd be rotating back to where we had animals in 22 to see what the yield benefit would be without having any additional fertility other than some nitrogen in our strips. And this is also the year that we had the barns working truly on their own with electric solar power, either manually advanced or the ability to advance them autonomously, which was a big deal for us. And so I've got a picture or a video here. So if you want to see what it looks like, this is the Cluster Cluck, the first barn that we started last summer. We modified this front pen so it has tooth combs to keep the sheep in, but allow the forage to pass through. And you can see kind of the rate of speed that it creeps. And we've got the winch on the front of the barn. You really kind of see the cable right there. And then the sheep are riding high and mighty on the raised floor. They're not always out there. A lot of times that when they hear the barn move, they run out right away, but these had been moved right before this, so they were already fed. But you can see them kind of riding and grazing as they go here to see what the crawl looks like. So, last but not least, I'm getting close to the end here. Hopefully I have time for some questions. Stock cropping by the numbers. What does this look from an economic? It's really cool, and I hear that stuff, but does this make any money for anyone? And so these are the numbers that I have to share on what this system or the potential could be in the future for this. So if we look at the 20-foot, the original barn that we created, which I feel this width will probably be what you would use on a field scale level. We need just 3/4 of an acre to operate this on from a pasture standpoint when we're grazing two times a year on the same acre. So 3/4 of an acre required for that. And on that 3/4 of an acre, we're producing 10 hogs, a combination of 8 lambs or goats, and then 300 chickens with 250 chicken cycles to get to those numbers. And what we're producing off of that, that's about $5,000 of premium pasture-raised revenue, amounting, when you do the math out to the acre, about $15,000 an acre of pasture-raised protein using average USDA pasture-raised prices. When you look at the corn yield that we had in between, our normal yields were about 240 to 45 bushel an acre, about 120 feet away from these strips. And with altering the arrangement and without doing anything else other than putting the gaps in, we raised 305 bushel an acre corn with about 18 to 20 inches of rain this year. Again, about 10 to 15 short of what we normally are here versus our normal production. We have not put any dry fertilizer on this plot since we started with the animals in 2020 would have been the last year we did that. So we reduced the off-farm nutrient needs by 75%. All we're doing is adding a little bit of additional nitrogen to top off the manure for any inconsistencies that we might have throughout the plot. And we've 10x'd the amount of biodiversity on the farm. When you add up the difference in the species of animals, and you look at all of the different species that we're using in our mixes along with the corn, and then I have no idea. I'm not above my pay grade to understand all the things in the biome of the ground underneath that we're doing, but I know that we're doing way, way more than what we would do in the field that surrounds that it would just be in a corn and soybean rotation. So at the end of the day, when you put all the inputs in, including the cost of what we think the cluster cluck will be at when we actually bring it out for production, at the end of the day, how much money did we make in this system in 2023? When you take the broad acre yield of the livestock and the crop yield that we had off of this and take all the costs against it, we netted $2,200 an acre of potential profit. It sounds great because on my corn acres this year, I was lucky enough to sell it ahead. A lot of it was $5.5, $6. I made about $300 to $400 on my corn, which is a fantastic year. But I know I'll never get to this with regular corn production. And keep a lot of the nutrients, and increase biodiversity. And then when you're talking, carbon intensity is all the buzz right now. If you took a carbon intensity score of this system, of the plants being there to feed the animals and the animals there to feed the plants, I don't know if the GREET model would know what to do with what we're doing here. So, but the biggest challenge to scaling this stuff is, from a productivity standpoint, it makes a lot of sense, but how do you actually get these animals to market and to the consumers that would want them, because we don't have independent processing really left at any type of scale that could handle this. And so that's really the challenge that we're faced with. And so I spent last summer talking to folks like Iowa Secretary of Ag Mike Nag. This is him on the farm in July. He was impressed with what we were doing. He recommended that Senator Joni Ernst come out. This is Joni with me in late July last year as well. And the fun thing about this trip was Joni had such a good time, I talked her into taking one of my stock cropper shirts, which you can't see on the back. It says stock cropper on front. On the back, it says cluster cluck me ASAP. And I don't think she saw it, but she put it on anyway. She wore it the rest of the day on the campaign trail. She was heading down to the state fair in Iowa that night. And she ended up meeting up with Ronnie DeSantis for beer at a brewery. And there is Joni Ernst wearing my stock cropper shirt with Ronnie D. And Ron tweeted this out to the whole country. And so I was getting messages from friends all over the place seeing that, so it was pretty neat. So the path forward for me through this journey, you know, I'm trying to create a business. I'm an entrepreneur out of this of building and selling Picos. And the market, you know, I get the question all the time, I really like what you're doing, how can I get one of these things? We're capital limited right now, and so we're doing it one at a time. So we're focusing on what's the easiest and cheapest to make, which is the Pico, which I classify as the protein sovereignty market. Then we move into the cluster cluck nano, which is dual species, which I'm hoping by 25, 26 we'll have these available for sale for acreages, solar arrays, silvopasture, orchards, vineyards, you name it. And then last but not least, with the constraints on the processing side for a scaled stock cropping production, the bigger barn, the Max 9, you know, likely a couple years down the road. So it's one thing to see this on YouTube or at a presentation in February. It's another thing to see it in person. I have a lot of people that have come and traveled a big distance, and they said, we really didn't get this until we showed up to see it in person. So I know it's a long way. It's 550 miles to Buffalo Center, Iowa from here, but you're all warmly invited to my field day on August 24th. It's a Saturday morning, the weekend before Labor Day weekend. So we try to put it on a Saturday so that as many folks that are working during the week have the option to come to it as well. So we'd love to see you there on August 24th. If not, the farm is always open to tours. I went out and got to tour the Minokan farm, which was absolutely fantastic yesterday. And I have an open book policy too. So if you're driving down I-35 and you want to come see us, there's my cell phone, there's my email. Feel free to take a picture of that. These are all my social channels here. The Stock Cropper on YouTube is where I have most of my content. If you want to see the back development story of things, I'm also on Facebook and Instagram. And on Twitter, or now what is X, I'm at Zebulus Prime, and don't ask. It was, when I set up my Twitter account, I didn't think I'd be in Bismarck, North Dakota sharing my Twitter handle, but this was I was in a rock and roll band in college, and this was my alter ego when I was on stage. So that's a warning for you kids with whatever your Twitter handle is. You may want to adjust it. And then last but not least, if you're interested in cluster clucks, my website, thestockcropper.com, there's a mailing list on there that you can go and subscribe to that. And when we have cluster clucks available, we're going to announce through that avenue first. And last but not least, I am, if a shameless plug, I am going to be doing another investment round here sometime in the next few months. And so if you know anybody from the investment community, we're going to be doing a second round here, and feel free to talk to me afterwards. So I'll conclude briefly. I've got 4 minutes. Really like having that clock, is handy to have. This has been a really, really rewarding path to go down compared to the conventional line of ag I was in for the first 18 years of my career. The people that I meet in this space, like Jay at the Minokan farm, it has just done nothing but enrich my life. And I'm hoping the goal of what I'm doing with Stock Cropper is to create a system or tools that can get more people involved with agriculture and the production of plants and protein rather than fewer. That's really, I spent the first half of my career kind of helping speed the funnel of consolidation now. The goal for me now is to flip the funnel upside down and get more people back on the land. So with that, I say thank you very much, and I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Got a question right off the bat here.
It's on. I think what you're doing is really good, or really great, actually. But I do have one question I'm sure you've had to deal with. Are your units pretty stable when you get a lot of wind, or do you have problems with them flipping or moving around much, or how do you deal with that?
That's a great question. So the answer to that is, yeah, we've had a number of high-speed wind events that have come through. But the great thing about my buddy Sheldon, the engineer, he builds, everything that he builds is built like a brick shit house, to put it politely. And they are very, very heavy and the low center of gravity to the ground. And so, no, we haven't had any issues. Even the Pico, I think, on the ground, it weighs about 600 pounds right now. And the way that it's designed, I think we can get air to move through it on the bottom with the open panels. And so, no, we haven't had any issues. The other question similar to that is I get a lot is predators. Have we had any issues with that? No. In 4 years, we've never lost a single chicken to a coyote, a fox, a mink, anything with the design that we have. So.
More questions?
And I'll be around the rest of the afternoon if you want to talk then as well. So.
Scott, you got another one? Who's?
Sure. So the question is, did I factor in the cost of the tractor on the other end? Dad, what's that tractor worth? $1,000. So no, I'm just joking. No, we didn't factor that in because we knew that the tractor wasn't ever going to be a part of it if it scaled. So the cost that I was using in my calculations would be for the cost of the winch with an earthen anchor that we would install and put at the end of the run. So like if you were going to do it at scale, we would have probably permanent concrete anchors that you would hook your cable to and then just pull towards that. Yes, so the question is, did we factor in the cost of the grain supplement? 100% we did, so all of those calculations for feed cost, and that was not grinding our own stuff and having the advantage of what the system's intended to, that was going to the co-op and buying 50-pound bag of feed, and all of those numbers were built into the profitability that I shared. Good question.
What kind of time factor are you personally putting into keeping one of those functions?
Yep, so the question is, what is the time factor that I'm spending on keeping one functioning? So the model that I've developed that factors in the labor costs on how much time would you spend a day if you had a fleet of these, is it takes about 10 to 12 minutes to go out. If you've got a dump, it's usually every couple days that we have to take feed out. We put that in a UTV along with a 250-gallon IBC tote that we take water out if it doesn't rain. And so we factor, 10 to 12 minutes per barn to chore per day. And it's shorter if they don't need feed and water. Then it's just a matter of running out and making sure that everything's doing well. But the whole reason to make things autonomous is so the farmer's not spending time yanking things around. They go around and do the animal husbandry work that really is where the value comes in with the system. So,
Zach, have you done any analysis on the soil health benefits of where you started, where you're headed?
So we don't yet, but this summer we will, because in 2024 we will have completed the cycle where we will have 2 generations of either crop or livestock on the strips. And so I do have somebody that is lined up to plan to come out and help us try to analyze what we're doing versus the regular conventional practice that just a couple hundred feet away on the same soil type. So hopefully by the field day we'll have more data to share to see what, if anything, that we're doing for good there. So.
Any other questions for Zach? Yep, we got one here. And we got a...
So I'm curious what, you said you had a 5-seed mix. What are you planting that you're feeding these animals?
So it's been a little bit different every year, but the cool season lane was oats, forage rape, annual rye, Sudan grass, cowpeas. And then when we go to we do 2 different plantings. We do the cool season lane, and then we wait so that when the barn gets there that we've got the warm season in the right stage. And that is usually millet, sorghum Sudan, cowpeas, sunflower. This year we did like an 8-way mix, I think, on our summer. So we've got a whole ton of diversity. That's the other cool thing, like the amount of pollinators and bugs and stuff that have shown up in the fields that we never would have seen before when you have all these flowers and things out there. It's just incredible. We don't have sunflowers in Iowa, so to have sunflowers growing up in the middle of the cornfield, it's pretty foreign to us. So.
Well, Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, so the question is, do we orientate the corn rows north and south or east and west? Everything I've been taught up to this point is that the corn does best in a north-south orientation. But I know Precision Planting has done research, if that's what you're alluding to, where east and west, they don't show an advantage with corn, but they do show less of an inflection for soybeans because the sun comes up and the light shines all the way down without much of a shadow on the beans in between. So, but for what we're doing, north and south is the arrangement that we started with. So.